She told me to pack my bags at my own son's funeral, smiled while she said it, loud enough for 40 guests to hear. She had no idea that by the time she finished that sentence, my son had already made sure she would regret it. My name is Harold Whitfield. I am 71 years old. Stay with me to the end, because the woman who humiliated a grieving father in his own living room ends this story in handcuffs. If you like stories about family, betrayal, and people getting exactly what they deserve, hit subscribe right now, because this channel lives for stories like this one. I built the house on Larkspur Road with my own two hands, starting back in 1985. I was 26, working nights at the plant, and my wife Eleanor was pregnant with our only son, Marcus. We had a half-acre lot, borrowed lumber, and more determination than sense. We raised Marcus in that house, watched him leave for the army at 18, and watched him come home 4 years later with a quiet strength that hadn't been there before. Eleanor passed 6 years ago, sudden, no warning. After that, it was just me, alone in a house built for a family of 3. So when Marcus told me he wanted to move in with his new wife, Denise, to help take care of his old man, I thought it was the kindest thing anyone had offered me in years. I had no idea the woman moving into my home had already started doing math in her head about what that house was worth. Denise was 31 when she married my son, warm in public, quick with a compliment at church. Behind my own front door, a different woman lived. She replaced Eleanor's curtains without asking. She turned the room where I kept Eleanor's quilting frame into her home gym, and I let it go, because it was easier than fighting. I noticed how she talked about the house like it already belonged to her. I noticed how she asked Marcus more than once, why the deed was still only in my name. I told myself I was an old man reading too much into things. I loved my son more than I trusted my own instincts. I was wrong. Here's where the story really starts. 6 weeks before Marcus died, he sat me down at the kitchen table on a Sunday morning while Denise was out and slid a sealed envelope across to me. His hands weren't quite steady. He told me to hide it somewhere Denise would never find it and to open it the second anything ever happened to him. I laughed it off. He didn't laugh back. He looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before, something between fear and resolve. I locked the envelope in the old fireproof box in my closet and didn't ask more questions because my son looked like a man who already knew something the rest of us didn't. What was inside that envelope is the entire reason this story ends the way it does, and we're just getting to the part where it matters. If you're invested already, subscribe now because things are about to move fast. The call came on a Thursday evening in September. Marcus had been driving home when a delivery truck ran a stop sign and hit his car broadside. He didn't make it to the hospital. The days that followed are a blur. Funeral homes, caskets, phone calls to relatives in 3 states. Denise handled most of the arrangements, and I was grateful because I could barely dress myself. I had no idea that in less than a week, the woman helping me plan my son's funeral would stand in my own living room and tell me to get out. The funeral was held at the church where Marcus was baptized 39 years earlier. More than 100 people came. Afterward, everyone gathered back at the house. I was sitting in my own armchair, still in my funeral suit, when Denise leaned down close to my ear and said, loud enough for the room to hear, "Stop crying, pack your bags, and get out. This is my house now. You have 30 days." The room went completely silent. My neighbor of 28 years, Gerald, froze mid-sentence with a coffee cup halfway to his mouth. Every person in that living room heard what she said. On the day we buried my son, in the house I built with my own hands 40 years earlier, I did not raise my voice. Something in me went completely still, the way water goes still right before it turns to ice. I thought about Marcus. I thought about that envelope. I smiled at Denise and said one word, "Fine." I packed one bag, grabbed the fireproof box, and walked straight past her toward the door. She looked almost disappointed I wasn't crying, wasn't begging. I stepped out into the cold evening air and walked 2 houses down without looking back once. Less than a day later, there was a real estate agent's car parked in my own driveway. By the following morning, there was a police cruiser parked right behind it. Here's exactly how that happened. Gerald took me in that night without asking a single question. Over coffee at his kitchen table, I told him everything. He shook his head, jaw tight. "That house is yours, Harold. Deed's been in your name since before Marcus was born. She's got no legal ground to stand on." My mind, though, was already on that envelope. That night, alone under a small kitchen lamp, I finally opened it. Inside were three things: a copy of the deed, confirming the house had always been mine, alone; a life insurance policy, $400,000. Its beneficiary quietly changed from Denise to me 2 months before Marcus died; and a letter, handwritten, in my son's own hand. He'd discovered Denise was secretly draining their savings and had run up nearly $50,000 in hidden debt. He believed she was planning to eventually push me out of the house so she could sell it, and he'd quietly begun preparing to file for divorce. He asked me to forgive him for not telling me sooner and to protect myself no matter how things looked. I read that letter 3 times, crying, not just grief now, but something else settling into my chest: clarity. My son had seen this coming, and he'd spent his final months quietly protecting a father he loved. The next morning, while I sat barely touching my breakfast, Denise was already moving fast back at my house. A neighbor called to say she'd seen a moving truck and a real estate sign in the driveway. Denise was trying to sell my house less than 24 hours after burying her husband, but Marcus's letter had told me exactly where to look. I called an old family friend, an attorney named Walter Kessler, who'd handled Eleanor's and my paperwork decades earlier. 2 hours later, he called back with news that turned my stomach. A quitclaim deed had been filed just 3 days earlier, supposedly signed by Marcus, transferring the house to Denise. The notary stamp placed Marcus signing paperwork in Ohio on a day his own employer's travel records showed he was 400 miles away in Chicago. The notary had no record of ever notarizing anything for Marcus, on that date or any other. It didn't take long to trace the forged stamp back to a former co-worker of Denise's who still had access to an old, unused notary seal. This wasn't a family dispute anymore. This was forgery and deed fraud, both felonies. Walter asked me one question: did I want to handle this quietly or report it? I said, report all of it. Walter filed a formal complaint that same afternoon. By 4 o'clock, the case had reached the Financial Crimes Unit. Detective Maria Ruiz confirmed the impossible travel timeline within hours. She also discovered Denise had already tried to file an early claim on Marcus's life insurance, not realizing the beneficiary had been changed 2 months earlier, an attempt that triggered its own fraud review before police were even involved. Every move Denise made after burying her husband was quietly working against her, exactly the way Marcus had planned it would if she ever tried something like this. The next morning, a police cruiser pulled into the driveway of my own house at 7:40 a.m. Denise answered the door in her bathrobe, half asleep, and was informed she was under investigation for deed fraud and forgery. She tried to explain that Marcus had signed the paperwork before he passed. Detective Ruiz calmly informed her Marcus had been in Chicago that day, confirmed by his own employer. Within a week, Denise and the notary were formally charged. Denise with deed fraud, forgery, and attempted insurance fraud. The forged deed was voided immediately, restoring full ownership of the house to my name, exactly where it had always legally belonged. Denise was given 10 days to vacate, the same house she'd given me only 30 days to leave less than 2 weeks earlier. I moved back into the house on Larkspur Road, almost exactly 1 month after I'd walked out with one bag and a metal box under my arm. I found Eleanor's old quilting frame shoved in a hallway closet and set it back up where it belonged. Denise eventually took a plea deal, probation, a permanent record, and a court order to repay every dollar tied to the fraud. She never contacted me again. Some nights I still sit in that same armchair, the one I was sitting in the day she told me to pack my bags in front of 30 grieving guests, and I think about my son. Even in his final months, even carrying his own quiet fears, Marcus found a way to protect his father one last time. That envelope wasn't just paperwork. It was his last act of love for me, prepared months before he ever knew it would be needed. I lost my son, and nothing will ever fill that space. But I kept the house we built our family in, and I got to keep the truth of exactly who he really was, right until the very end. If this story moved you, tell me where you're watching from in the comments. Hit that like button and subscribe for more real stories about family, betrayal, and justice that shows up exactly when it matters. I'll see you in the next one.